So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to build this 1/12 scale miniature easel kit. Now this kit can be purchased on my Etsy store. The link will be in the description box below. Now this easel does have a workable, extendable arm like so, and it also has a little tiny working strap and buckle so that we can keep all of our paint tubes and our contents of our artist box nice and safe. So please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't subscribed already, and if you have already purchased one of these kits, thank you so much for supporting me and my little channel. I really hope that you enjoyed the process of this little build, and so without any further ado, let's get making it. So this kit is going to be supplied with 10 small tubes of paint. There is going to be some leather paper products in there as well. So the long piece of leather paper is going to act as a strap. There'll also be 2 small handle pieces as well. One is a handle and one to cover up the end of that strap. Now you will notice that my leather paper is coloured brown on one side, but when you receive yours, it shall just be white. There is also a buckle in there so that we can close this box up if we choose to. There will be a metal hinge, and there will also be 4 rhinestones in there to act as the studs to decorate those handles with. Now to colour the actual wooden parts of this kit, I would recommend something like an alcohol marker or those wood stain pens. I do like to use a calligraphy ink. I find that this does dry really quickly and I just really like the colour of this ink, so I'm going to use that. Now I'm just going to paint it on with a soft brush, give that some time to dry, and then I will flip that over and repeat that on the opposite side. For my actual palette itself, I'm using this oak coloured furniture pen just because when I do paint the actual palette, I do want my paint colours to shine through a little lighter, plus I do like to have that slight contrast in colour as well. So I would recommend that you start with the hinge part of this box first, just because you are going to need some time for that glue to set up. So we are going to take our pieces which are marked with H and HC, and we are going to take our hinge itself. For glue, I would recommend either this B7000 or an E6000, just because it is going to give us a little bit more wiggle room over something like super glue. I would also highly recommend you have some clips on hand as well, because we are going to want this to have a tight bond. So taking our wooden piece marked H and our hinge, we're going to put some of our glue on the engraved section, and we want the barrel of the hinge to rest on the top of that wood, and then we should have a flush top like you are seeing here now. Next we shall take our piece which is marked HC, this is for hinge cover, and we are going to add some glue onto the entire length of either one of these pieces, and I would suggest not putting too much glue on your hinge because a glue like this does kind of seep out. You can use a fine set of tweezers to pull out any glue from your hinge if you do use this glue, and that's what I had to do, whereas if I was using super glue that wouldn't have worked and I would have ruined my hinge and I would have had to replace it. So once you've put your glue into place, make sure everything is aligned up, and then you want to pin it down with some clips and pop it aside for it to cure for a moment, and then we're going to repeat the same process with the opposite side of the hinge. Once that's complete, then I would recommend you clip the opposite side and then leave this alone and just let that glue set up, because you really want to have a strong grip and hold on this hinge. Next we are going to take the base of the box, and we are going to take a small piece with a letter D for divider, a piece with B for bottom and the long piece with S, which is for side. Now for glues, I am using Alien's Tacky Glue. You could use a wood glue if you wanted to, and a top tip is always try to make sure that the letters which are engraved into this wood are on the inside of the box, just because depending on how you paint this or finish this, they may be visible on the outside. But do not worry, I wasn't paying attention at one point and I glued one of my sides on the outside, a little bit of wood filler, filled it in, it's now invisible. So first of all, we are going to take the piece which is marked S and we're going to glue it along the long side of the box, and then we are going to glue it on top of that base piece. Next, we are going to take the piece marked B and we're going to glue this on one of the shorter ends of the box. At this point, it doesn't matter which end it is, just make sure that the cutout part is facing downwards. This needs to be glued onto the wood side of it. I would also recommend that you have something like a set of 1, 2, 3 blocks, or in this instance, I'm just using some really cheap Lego pieces which I purchased on Temu recently. They make a fantastic little 90-degree jig for me to make sure that I can keep my pieces as straight as possible. So next we are going to take our piece which is marked D and we are going to glue it along the under long side and the short side, and we need to decide on whereabouts we want to glue this. For myself, I plan on putting things like paintbrushes and a little rag down there, so I don't want to take up too much space, and that will also leave me more space for my paint tubes in the main box itself. Our box should now look like this, so we can just pop that to the side and allow that glue to cure. Next, we are going to take this piece which is marked T and we are going to take a piece which is marked top and also another one of these long side pieces. We are going to run a small bead of glue along that long edge and glue that into place on top of piece marked top. Next, we are going to take the small piece which is marked T. This does look very similar to the piece which is marked B, and we need to glue one of the short edges and the underneath side, and again making sure that that cutout notch is glued to the wood. Now that the base of my box has had plenty of time to dry, I'm going to start thinking about putting this thing together. So looking at my hinge, first of all, I'm going to make sure that my hinge hasn't been glued shut. If it does, and if you have used the same glue as me, then you can use a sharp object to scrape that glue out of the barrel of the hinge. And also, when you open your hinge, your two pieces of wood should not rub together. Then you want to make sure that your hinge or the barrel of your hinge is visible on the outside of the box, and you'll glue it into place like you see me demonstrating here. At this point, we only need to glue in the bottom half of the hinge. So we are going to run some glue along the short side and the longer side of the bottom half of the hinge. Next, I'm going to take a toothpick and just spread that glue out a little more even. I do want to make sure that I have full coverage on this part of the build, because with it being a hinge, it is going to have some stress on it with the opening and closing of the box. I'm also going to clear out some of that glue because I did put on quite a bit and I did have quite a lot of the seep coming through. I am a messy gluer, there is no denying that, and this is why I like to pre-stain my items before I build them, because I know I am very, very messy when I glue things. So now that I've got that cleaned up and aligned and I'm satisfied that I've got everything as square as possible, I'm going to then leave that side to cure, and then I'll come back to it in an hour or so that I can then move on to my next stages. Next, we are going to take piece A and the top of our box. Now, when I designed this box, I've designed this to have a workable and extendable arm, but I designed it very snug so that it just holds itself into place. So what you're going to need to do is insert piece A into that tiny slot and just ever so slightly loosen it off a little bit, just with a little bit of friction, and then that will give you just a little bit of wiggle room. Next, we are going to take the two long skinny sticks out of our kit, and we are going to glue those either side of piece A. We need to be careful not to glue piece A into place, and then when you're happy with your alignment, slide piece A out and then set this aside to dry. Next, I'm going to add on the other side of my base piece, and again just run some glue along the bottom half of that. This piece could be added after the hinge was added. I just like to add it after that hinge has had time to dry, just in case if I glued anything shut again, and then I wouldn't ruin that piece. But like I say, you could do that at the same time that you glue the hinge into place. Next, we are going to take these two very small pieces from the kit and our part which is marked A, and we need to make sure that the A is facing downwards. So then we need to run a small amount of glue along the top of the part marked A, and then we're going to glue that up against the larger of the two small pieces. Next, we are going to take the smallest piece and run a bead of glue along the smaller side of that small piece. It's not quite square, so you can tell the difference, and that gets buttered up to the piece that we've just added, and your piece should now look like this. Now I'm going to glue the top of the box into place. So just like we did with the base, I'm going to run some glue along one of the short edges and then the long edge, and then pop that into place, and then I can immediately take my final side piece and just like before run some glue along my box and then glue that into place. I did attach a small, or I did wrap a small elastic band around this just to hold everything into place after I gave everything a bit of an adjustment to make sure that everything was nice and square. Next, we are going to create the rest for the easel, which would hold the canvas into place. So taking the two pieces marked R, we are going to take the skinniest of the two and we are going to glue that onto the other, and then this should now look like a little L. Now taking this rest piece, we are going to run some glue along the wider part of the piece, and we are going to glue that to the base of the easel. Now, something that we need to keep in mind about the arm of this easel is that the hook part of this is a weak point, so we do need to protect that somehow. So for that, I'm using some gel super glue, and I am applying this quite thickly. That doesn't matter because I will be covering up this with paint later on, and so I'm just going to cover all of those seams and those joins, and then I'm going to cure that with some accelerator. If, like me, at some point during the build you weren't paying attention and you glued your piece the wrong way around and now your letters are on the outside of the box, don't worry about it. All you're going to need is the tiniest amount of wood filler or poly filler, whatever you've got at hand. Just pop it into place. No one will ever know that there is a letter engraved to that piece. I allowed for the filler a few moments for it to dry. It is such a shallow depth, it didn't take long at all, and then I just covered that up with the same stain which I painted the box with. And finally, it is time to start painting this little easel and giving it some character and bringing it to life. So like with all of my projects, I'm covering this with a water-based Ronseal walnut varnish. I then knock everything back with an emery board so that I can give some variation in the color to this little easel and to give it a little bit of age. When you are doing this, do be mindful of where you are putting your finishing paints or your varnishes, as I did design the neck or the arm of this easel to be a very snug fit. So like me, you may want to sand anything back which you get inside that arm or on that arm, and if you sand it back, it will actually give you some really cute little realism, because if this was a real easel and it was used over many years, that paint and that varnish would have been rubbed off of that part where that friction would have been caused from this easel being in use. Next, we are going to take our long strip of leather paper and our buckle, and we are going to thread the leather paper from the flat end, not the pointed end. We only need a short amount, and we need to glue that into place, and we need to make sure that we do have a little bit of leeway in movement on the buckle. For myself, I'm using a brass acrylic paint for my little gems, and I'm going to colour the other parts of my hardware with that same alcohol marker. The larger of these two pieces is now going to be rounded slightly on on a small paintbrush, and then we need to decide on the length of our buckle piece. For myself, I am doing mine quite short, so I'm just taking a measurement. Depending on where you put your divider will determine your measurement. Trim that down to place. I'm just gluing my leather paper in with some tacky glue, and then I'm going to gently tease that leather paper through that 1mm gap. Now, leather paper is a very strong product. It should not rip as you are doing this. For myself, because my paper had swollen just a little bit from my marker pen, I am going to just help it come through that gap ever so slightly with my tiny little pointy tweezers, and then just place that down into place, and everything will be very securely fastened. At this stage, it's important that we allow this part to dry, because we now need to take the pointy end from that strip of leather paper, and the way that we are going to determine the length where we're going to glue it is we are going to feed it through the buckle, which we have just attached, through both of those little loops, and then we need to decide on how long we want that leather strap to protrude. And then once we have decided, and once we've figured out how long we would like that to be, it's just a case of then marking off your piece of leather and cutting it at a point so that it does not pass through that opening where the arm fits, and then we can just glue it into place with our tacky glue. Next, we are going to take the small leather piece and we are going to coat the underside of this completely in the glue. We want the glue to go over the whole of this so that it holds that leather strap into place like so. Next, I'm going to take the large handle piece, and instead of running glue across the entirety of this, I'm only putting it on the two areas which are going to be glued down to the box itself, making sure not to get it on the rounded handle piece. Next, I'm going to take my tacky glue and just add a tiny amount inside the center of those holes, and then I'm going to take my little gems which I've already painted in a brass color with the help of a little gem sticky tool, and just pop those into place. And then we can add our two remaining gems above the strap, and that completes the build of this box. At this point, everything is ready, everything is looking nice, and we can turn our attention to the paint. So inside your kit, you will receive 10 of these paint tubes. Now, these tubes are perfectly formed. So to make them look like they have been used and so on by an artist, I'm actually using this electric engraving tool which I received for Christmas. You could use something like this. If you have a Dremel of some sort, then you could use that. It's going to work exactly the same. You could even use a file if you have something with a nice pointed edge on it, and it would work perfectly. The only thing which I would absolutely recommend is, if you do this, then please wear a respiratory mask or a mask of some sort, because this does kick off a lot of dust and you do not want this in your lungs. One of the things which I like about doing it this way is that it makes every single one of them look completely different. So for myself, I am going to give mine a coat of plastic primer. It is not necessary because these won't be handled, as they are going to be glued inside my box. And then once I've given everything a chance to dry, I'm just giving them a base coat of silver, and then I'm going through and picking some colors, and then to highlight that band and just give it a little bit of extra detail, I'm just using a fine black colored fine liner just to go over the edges of what would be a label. My leather paper has had plenty of time to dry, so at this point I can open up my box and I can start filling it with my paint tubes. Now, to glue my tubes of paint inside my box, again, I'm just using Alien's tacky glue. I use it for absolutely everything, and it sticks the resin down into place with no problems at all. Next, I'm going to use the exact same colours which I painted the colours on my tubes of paint with, and I'm going to transfer those onto my palette, as well as mixing the colours together just to give me more variations on there. Next, I'm going to add those colours onto my easel itself. I'm just doing a load of splattering on and then rubbing off and adding different colours. And one thing which I'm making sure to do is put the paint splatters on the hook of that easel arm. Because I had to add the super glue, it did make everything very high gloss, so that's a good way for me to disguise that. Next, I'm going to create some splatter using an old toothbrush, just dipped into some white paint, and then I'm going to knock some of that back a little bit, as well as wiping it around just to try and make the look of maybe someone had got a bit too much paint on it and then tried to wipe it away. So at this point I could leave it like this, or I could make paintbrushes or whatever else I want to accessorize it with. But what I want to do is create a small little paint rag. That is something which for myself I always have when I paint with oil paints. So to make that, I'm just using a small square cut from a wet wipe. I'm adding those same colors onto that piece of wet wipe that I painted the tubes and the palette with, and then to glue it into place and to set it, I'm actually using some watered down PVA glue. I did give it a little spritz with some IPA as well to help that saturate even further, and then I added a tiny bit of glue underneath it just to glue everything into place. And this also does a rather nice job of hiding my small little strap of leather as well. And that brings me to the end of the video. So I do hope that you enjoyed the video today. If you are not already subscribed to my channel, please do consider subscribing, give the video a little like, come and say hi. And if you would like to purchase one of these kits, these can be purchased on my Etsy store. I will leave the link to that in the description box below. And yeah, with all that being said, I hope that you are having a fantastic day, or you've had a fantastic day, and I shall see you very soon. Bye.